Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Insightful Leader Live. I'm your host, Rob Mitchum. Today, we are going to be discussing AI and advertising. This time, it's personal, with our guests, Professors Jake Tini and Brett Gordon. But first, just a few announcements up at the top. The Insightful Leader Live is brought to you by Kellogg Insight, which is the digital magazine for research and ideas from the faculty of the Kellogg School of Management. At insight.kellogg.northwestern.edu, you'll find tons of articles about topics ranging from leadership, teamwork, and careers to artificial intelligence, finance, and innovation. You'll also find episodes of our podcast, The Insightful Leader, plenty more webinars like this one, and you can sign up for our twice-weekly newsletter to stay up to date on our stories and activities. We're here today on Zoom, of course, and just a couple quick Zoom notes for the hour. We're about to close the chat, so we invite you to ask questions using the Q&A button in your Zoom app during the hour. We'll get to some questions at the end from the audience. You can turn on closed captioning using the live transcript button in your Zoom app. And then finally, we're recording today's session. We will share a link to the video in the coming days with everyone who registered, but you'll also be able to find it excuse me, on the Kellogg YouTube channel and at Kellogg Insights under the Webinars tab. All right, those are all the announcements, and I'd like to now introduce today's guests. To my left is Jacob Tini. Jake is an associate professor of marketing at the Kellogg School of Management and one of the leading researchers on personalized persuasion, which is the science of tailoring messages to who people are and how they think. His work sits at the intersection of consumer psychology, social influence, and artificial intelligence. Thanks for joining us, Jake.
My pleasure, thank you.
To my right is Brett Gordon. Brett is the Charles H. Kellstadt Professor of Marketing at the Kellogg School of Management. His research applies methods from causal inference, machine learning, and empirical industrial organization to pricing, advertising, promotions, retailing, and experimentation. He partners with companies to measure and enhance marketing effectiveness, and his recent work examines digital advertising measurement methods while developing new evaluation approaches. He is also the co-host of a podcast called How I Wrote This, which talks to marketing researchers about the story behind their papers. Thanks for joining us, Brett.
Great to be here.
I want to start with Jake. So we mentioned personalized persuasion in your bio. Explained what it was briefly, but talk a little bit more about that and where it overlaps with personalized advertising, which we'll be discussing today.
Yeah, I mean, personalized persuasion is kind of the psychological engine behind personalized advertising. So it's really about tailoring the communication context to the message recipient in some form. So when you think about any kind of communication context, there's really four elements. You've got the recipient of that message, the message itself, the source of the message, and the context or environment in which it's delivered. When we're talking about personalized persuasion, we're talking about having a message that is tailored specifically to the psychology or behaviors or interests of the recipient, or maybe it's from a source who is similar to that recipient, or maybe it's in a context that is really reflective of kind of the person's interests or beliefs. And so the idea behind personalized persuasion is that when you tailor a message, when you match it or align it to this recipient, it enhances its persuasive effectiveness. I'd be happy to go into the psychological mechanisms behind it, but that's kind of the broad overview.
Okay, great. We'll be getting into it this hour. Thanks.
Yeah, all right.
Brett, you have covered a lot of different topics in marketing research. You've worked with many companies. Where has your work touched on this idea of personalized advertising?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of my work is really focused on ad measurement in general, in terms of asking that very basic question of, you spent some money on an ad campaign, did it actually generate an incremental return? And so what we really want to know is, above kind of the business as usual set of conversions or activities you are trying to generate, did the advertising create more than you would otherwise have expected? And that's really tricky because when you run a campaign, you don't always get to observe or see a kind of proxy for that what would have happened otherwise case. And in the case of kind of more personalized advertising or AI-based personalized advertising, it's still the same question. So you have all these new tools available that are helping people create custom creative, custom delivery, but you still have to ask that basic question of, are you getting more than what you put in? And how do you do that, and how do you measure that properly?
Great, excellent. So let's take a step back and just talk about what personalized advertising means in a marketing context. So maybe Jake, if you could take that on first. How does that, what parts of a marketing approach go into personalized advertising?
Yeah, I'll give kind of a simple dichotomy or simple breakdown between two ways that kind of personalization is thought about, and I'm sure Brett can expand upon it and improve upon it. But I think at two levels you can think about targeting. So that's like I'm trying to find people who are in the market for this product, right? So for example, maybe I know you're looking for a Jeep and Brett's looking for a clown car. And so even though I know you're in the market for these different cars, I will send you messages because I know I'm targeting you based on kind of your interests, right? Now let's say I stick with you, Rob, and you want the Jeep. Well, I can talk about that Jeep in a lot of different ways. I could talk about the ruggedness of it, the open air capabilities, maybe the gas mileage, whatever the case might be. That's the personalization. So targeting is kind of like figuring out who might want this product or category, and then personalization is then taking that message and really kind of honing it in on the interests or values that that person has.
Great. And it's important to note that this didn't start with AI. This is an older process, even older than the internet, which I think is how most of us think about personalized advertising. So, Brett, can you give us a little background history of when did it start and what forms does it take?
Sure. So I think an early form I'm aware of is actually goes back to the late 1800s and the Sears catalog. Sears catalog sold practically everything. And they realized that if you bought a stove from them, you might be in the market for a new set of pots and pans later on. And so that they would mail you with your new next kind of catalog, a mailer, a promotion for pots and pans perhaps. So that's like the late 1800s. Fast forward a bit more recently, and even in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of the credit card companies, financial services companies, got into personalization a little bit more because they also had data on what people had bought, so that's some background information for them. And if you, let's say, had stayed at a luxury hotel recently, you might be more likely to get a statement stuffer, is what they called it, in your next card statement, advertising, maybe some luxury travel suitcases, for example. So those are all examples of personalization. It's helpful to highlight that, what can be personalized or what degree of personalization is fairly broad. You can personalize based on just knowing what someone bought last time. You can personalize just based on knowing, what region of the United States they're in. And that's really a very different, or it feels very different than knowing which website I visited, last week. But in the end, those are just different levels of personalization. So.
It sounds like personalized advertising requires more effort, more cost, more data, more complex in a lot of ways. So have people measured that it is, in fact, more effective than broader mass forms of advertising?
So that's a good question and a hard question to give a really all-encompassing answer to, because if you ask, is personalized advertising effective? The question is, well, what is it effective relative to? And how are you defining personalized advertising in that sense? There's 1,000 forms of personalized advertising. You can personalize based on where I live, what I did last week, what I bought last month, etc. So there's not really any single version of it, really. One concrete example would be, I know of a study, it was done by some folks at Stanford, where they added the first name of a person to email marketing campaigns, and that raised click-through rates by, I think it was 20%. So relative to not including that person's name in the subject line, personalization was there more effective. But that's just one version of personalization. That was done in one set of email marketing campaigns. I think maybe the one reasonable general data point to point to is really look at the money. Look at a lot of people put a lot of money behind retargeting campaigns, which are the kind where if you search for something and you click on a pair of shoes, and then the shoes travel you around the internet, reminding you that you clicked on them. And that's a form of personalized advertising as well. And lots of companies put a lot of money into that, and that suggests that they see some return to it as well.
Right. I mean, personalization kind of has like two elements to it if you're really trying to figure out kind of the benefits or cost pro analysis. First is like, well, I've got to figure out something about these people. Who are they? What do they like? What do they want? And that takes money and time. But we've gotten pretty good at that with a lot of footprint tracking online, behavioral tracking, all of these different things. The second step, and I think which is arguably constrained personalization more, is the authoring of that personalized content. So I have to now take in mind who you are, what you like. I have to then write some kind of creative copy that activates that in a compelling way. I've got to edit that and go back and forth. And then I have to do that at potentially a mass scale. And I think it's that second part that has really kind of limited the potential effectiveness. We see a ton of research showing that in laboratory studies, personalized ads are more effective than non-personalized, and definitely more effective than mismatched ads, where it's you got a message that was contrary to the things you like. The question is, how well can we translate that out into the field and into big kind of social media platforms and things like that? And obviously, no surprise when we're talking about AI, that changes a lot of the calculus with that. But in figuring out now how effective it is, all those metrics kind of come into play.
Mm-hmm. Before we get into AI and how it's going to transform this, what are some of the canonical success stories of professional or personalized advertising in the marketing field?
I mean, there's some true canonical stories and some false canonical stories. One I think that we've even chatted about was the targeting by target, where essentially they were able to learn that a young woman was pregnant before she had revealed it to her parents, and then her dad found out and got very upset. Why would you target her with this thing? And supposedly complained to Target. And to be honest, this is kind of the first, and so there was a news story about this, I think it was back in 2012, and this is really the first time that algorithms started to get news coverage as ooh, they know people better than people know people. And then reanalyses and reconsiderations later have suggested that, there was some truth to the idea that they were trying out these targeting attempts. Whether or not that specific story was true is a little unclear. And it's also possible, if Target were just sending out lots of maternity magazines, there's a good chance they could have just given it to someone unintentionally, and then we have this story unfold. So it's not to discredit the story being true, but it's maybe not as clear as kind of old canon would like to make it seem.
Bit of an urban legend.
Yeah, potentially.
Brett, who do you think does this well, sort of pre-AI? Who is setting the gold standard for personalized advertising?
Not surprisingly, because as you alluded to, you need data to do personalization. You can use coarse data, but having rich data is going to be more helpful. Having rich data, having attention, eyeballs of consumers. So the big tech companies do a pretty good job of this. And they did a good job of it in terms of sending people kind of the right message at sort of the right time to the right person pre-AI, because they have all this data and there are different models that they've developed to help make use of that. And what's changed in a way is just that the models are getting even more scalable and able to kind of use even more data for these purposes. So.
Great. Well, let's jump into the AI.
Jump into the AI.
You're right. We've held off long enough,
but let's shower after that.
I can barely contain myself. All I want to do is talk about AI.
I want to ask a question that both of you can answer because it feels like AI is going to transform every part of this process. So, tell me what aspect of personalization, personalized advertising, you think AI will make the biggest impact, and then we'll talk about some of the other ones. I'll go to Jake first.
I think this kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier. I think the biggest impact is going to come in terms of that creative personalization, how these messages will get tailored to individuals. So as kind of an ongoing example right now, most people are familiar with Google search, right? You type something in and some sponsored ad pops up to the top. Well, pre-AI, you would buy keywords as an advertiser, and then if that keyword got signaled, then your ad would pop to the top. What Google's doing now is it's first off expanded the kind of semantic network of keywords that will trigger for a specific brand. But then it's also using its generative AI to change what that sponsored ad looks like. So it will change the short copy that appears in that sponsored ad, and it will also shift the URL link that it takes you to. So whereas previously, maybe you were searching for new pens, and it would take you just to the home page of that pen brand. It's a bad word for me to choose because I have a hard time saying pen versus pen, but we're here now. Now, with the new AI version, what it can do is I can tell they actually want some calligraphy pens. And so rather than just taking you to the homepage of the website, it can take you to that specific URL link. So this is just one small way that we're seeing kind of that creative authoring being taken over by LLM, whereas previously or pre-AI, you'd have to have someone who wrote thousands of these different lines, connected them to different URLs, but now all of that can be automated as soon as it realizes the input.
Interesting. Right, same question.
So I'll give a partially related response. So on the one hand, if you're a small company, like if you're something akin to a mom and pop shop, there are just so many more tools out there now that make it very easy, or at least easier, to generate all sorts of marketing content and collateral. So Google, from their labs, has this Pomeli website where you type in your URL, and it scours your website and then generates marketing content for you that you would be posting on Instagram or whatever your chosen campaign, or Google or whatnot. And very easy, very low touch. You don't need to have any background. Now, it may not generate something that's the level of quality that you might aspire to, or that you could get if you hired an advertising agency, but for maybe solving 80% of the problem at zero cost, that might be a pretty appetizing solution for a lot of small businesses. At the other side of it, I think that what's really has changed a lot is the scale at which larger companies, like bigger advertising platforms, social media companies, are able to take their data and essentially unify their models, the way that they figure out what ad to show to what person at what point in time on what surface, and to do that at a scale that really wasn't possible a few years ago. And they're doing it by leveraging the same models that LLMs, large language models, use these days, but applying it to basically figure out what ad to recommend to a certain person at the place and time and whatnot. And the scale that they're able to do that is just new, really.
And they have a new data source.
And they have new data sources too.
People's chat history, right? So that's like what Meta's really been talking about leveraging, and maybe is leveraging, is yes, we can still kind of infer intent and interest based on their, again, digital footprints, where they're visiting, what they're going to. But it can also look to say, hey, this person in their chat 2 days ago was asking, what are some good hiking boots for, going up Mount Hood in Oregon? And now it can take that information and has a very direct signal, okay, this person is interested in this product. I know where they plan to use it, maybe even when they plan to use it, and so I can incorporate that information with all of the previous information in line with the different contexts that Brett mentioned.
And so part of that comes from, with LLMs, we know that what they are very good at doing is predicting the next token, the next word in a sequence. They're very, very good at sequential kind of prediction, and there's a lot of information, we think, in sequences. The fact that you search for new hiking boots one day, and a week later you're searching for new hiking trails, etc. That sequential information is very, very valuable. And old models tried to make use of that, but maybe didn't do as good of a job the way that these LLM type models are. And what a lot of these companies are able to do now is to take your interactions with ads across different sites and surfaces, also some of your organic actions, like what you clicked on and looked at just independent of the ads, but just what you did on their sites, and combine all of that together to figure out how to recommend the next ad to show you and to predict your likelihood of clicking through on an ad and your likelihood of buying after you might click through. And so that is the scale of that is simply changing.
You mentioned a couple times the idea of what surface to deliver the ad on. Is there a way that AI is changing the delivery of ads as well, how people are advertised to, marketed to?
It still comes back to figuring out, maybe there's a certain type of ad that would be better to show in someone's Facebook news feed when they're on their mobile device versus if they're on their desktop or on an iPad, or if they're looking at a CTV screen, or they're looking at streaming video on Disney Plus. And so just what previously might have happened is that you would have different models potentially using different kinds of data sets for each one of those surfaces. And now some companies are trying to unify that by pooling the data across those different environments and making better recommendations as a result of that. And that involves a lot of what people call transfer learning. I learn about kind of behavior and how to make predictions in one setting, like let's say on someone's news feed, but I want to figure out how I can take that information and apply that to showing them something in a streaming video environment.
Right. Or a Zoom webinar.
Or a webinar.
Perfect, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I think another way too that it's going to change and is starting to change, and we're seeing some experimentation with this by OpenAI, is dynamic advertisements. Like for so long it's been you get a static message and it either persuades you or it doesn't persuade you. Maybe you see it again, you click on it. Now the AI can pop up and say, hey, I hear you're interested in hiking boots. Would you like to explore this a little bit more with me? And now it can have a conversational dynamic. So it's also changing kind of the creative delivery, so it's not just about, well, what's the pretty picture you use, what's the wording you use. It's the engagement dynamic. How is it conversationally speaking to you? And it is also changing, like, what are some of the metrics that we care about? Typically, it's been click-through rate, conversion. Now it might be conversational engagement. How long do you spend talking with it? How much more information can you get out of this conversation? So this is something that we really have not seen in any form of advertising before, where AI has kind of like repackaged and improved like a lot of the ad delivery systems or the content that's being delivered, but this is kind of a new mode through which advertising is probably going to change.
I'm already seeing it popping up from the audience. The question about ethics, privacy that this approach raises.
Who cares about ethics?
So obviously there's a lot of impact there, but what are the two of you paying attention to as far as privacy and ethics, or what are marketers paying attention to newly with these AI tools and the new capabilities that they add?
You want to go? Me?
Yeah, you can take it first.
Okay, good. Put me up to that. So a few things. First, if we look to Europe, there's been a increasing pressure for data control, data privacy, right? That the US has been a bit slower or more reluctant to adopt. And although I think, there were reasons for that, AI has accelerated these concerns in a lot of different ways. I think one reason that, the US is and other places are a little hesitant to constrict AI too much is because it's a bit of an arms race right now. Like, who can develop AI the best, the fastest, the strongest? And the more you constrain its capabilities, its learning, its data, the more you're kind of constraining its potential growth, is one line of argument. However, what I think we really need to see, because there are lots of concerns, there's been increasing cases from clinical psychologists about people who have spiraled out in these conversations with AI. We know that they have a tendency to favor responses that make you feel good and are really kind of like praising you even when it's not so great of an idea. And so, there's really kind of twofold questions in terms of ethics. One, what are the regulations that we're going to place around data control, data privacy? What do I own? We've seen some private companies do this, like Apple has really kind of tightened all of the data that you put into their iOS systems. And then the other one is, well, what are the restrictions that are going to be placed on AI? So, much of this is pretty self-policed at this time. For example, OpenAI has claimed that with its new advertising system, it's not going to go to people that it believes are under the age of 18. It's not going to be about mental health or politics. So there's some sensitive topics that it's keeping. But this is us hoping that these AI companies are good to us, and keep their word and aren't using it in these other ways. And the only way to really enforce it is going to be through some kind of government regulation, which again is difficult, not only with how fast AI is moving, but how dynamic AI can be. Like, how do I police 1,000 to infinite variants of an ad when AI is creating them on the spot? That's a really, really hard question to tackle.
Absolutely. Anything to add, Brett?
No, I think I would emphasize the points around consent from consumers and control of data and access to their data, so for them to be aware of what information they're giving up when they're having these long conversations within an AI. That is information they're passing along to a third party who then generally owns that information now. So just as in the age of regular old search engines, probably don't search for things like your credit card numbers or social security number or whatnot, or very sensitive private health information. So just be aware of what you're giving up. And on the firm side, maybe the old adage of if what you were doing was known, was on the front page of the New York Times, then maybe maybe be a little bit nervous about it.
I also think there are some practical reasons for firms to restrain in some of the personalization they do. There's psychology research showing that when messages feel hyper-personalized, or it has gotten this information that you didn't expect it to be able to get, it can actually backfire, right? One of the reasons, and I mentioned psychological mechanisms earlier and you haven't gotten back to the question, so I'll just insert it myself.
Go leap right in,
yeah. Part of the reason that personalization is so effective is twofold. One is it feels very self-relevant, and we like things that are relevant to us. And two, it presents content that is very easy for our brains to process, right? Very fluent. And so personalization actually offers kind of a benefit to consumers. It feels good. We like it. It's giving us content. When that content switches to an interpretation of surveillance, you're watching me, you got these data that I didn't think you should have, this isn't being used in a legitimate way, now all of a sudden personalization will backfire. And so kind of for firms to understand that line where it's like, how much am I actually giving added benefit to my consumers versus how much is it just going to come across as me playing Big Brother, I think is also an important line for them to think about.
And that relates in an interesting way, of course, to the Target example from earlier, where as a consumer, my inference that I was kind of unfairly or eerily targeted is based on this. It's really based on a correlation. So I see someone sees ads for baby products. Oh, how did they figure out that I was pregnant? Not me, of course, but okay. Well, if those baby products were actually advertised to thousands and thousands of people, just everyone kind of who had maybe visited a website or something over a period of time, it's not really very good targeting. It could still be something better than kind of nothing, a broader strategy. But to infer that it was hyper personalized in that way actually takes a bit more work. And so maybe over time consumers will become a little bit more aware of this and understanding of it. Maybe not.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that, as a firm, you need to be able to manage.
I mean, it depends just on what are consumers' interpretations of how these algorithms work,
Yeah.
right? It could have been targeted just like, oh yeah, you went to this one page, so we're correlating it. But people think, oh, they must have been looking through my, right? Yeah. All that ultimately matters is consumer perception.
Yeah, and they were looking through my they had access to my phone and the microphone, and they've been listening to me and my household and everything. And
well, they do that.
They do that, yeah.
That is true.
Yeah, microwaves.
Yeah, microwaves, that's a key one. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but I think this is interesting places to go.
Yeah. So you talked about how, in some sense, it's seamless with the way personalization was being done before, just based on internet behavior. Who is using it right now? Like, it's hard to notice, I feel like, for a lot of consumers. But what are examples of AI and advertising for personalization being used out there currently?
I mean, if you're on Instagram or TikTok or name your other social media, you are being served ads that are benefiting from kind of AI algorithms in the form of what I was mentioning earlier of models that are kind of inspired by LLMs that use a lot of sequential information and combine data from your advertising interactions and your kind of non-advertising interactions, and helping those systems predict what's the right ad to show you. Because what you have to kind of remember is that as a consumer, when you open TikTok or Instagram and you see your feed, there are thousands and thousands of ads that could be shown to you on any one of those tiles, and they have to very, very quickly winnow that very long list down and figure out what to show you in the right order. And that's very hard to do. And these models scale very well at being able to do that and bringing in more information that they historically were. So in many ways, what you see as a consumer looks exactly the same right now as it did pre-AI, a few years ago. Hopefully, if the algorithms are doing anything, you're getting slightly more relevant ads than you used to. But it's not like something that you had no interest in buying. You're not going to all of a sudden see an ad that has some amazing creative and say, oh, I don't own a dog, but I suddenly want to buy the dog food as a result of seeing this ad. That's not going to happen.
It's still early days for the technology. What are some of the challenges or limitations that companies, advertisers are running up against as they experiment with this area?
I mean, I think it still has a ways to go in terms of like the creative deployment. It's, every iteration of a new LLM becomes more impressive than the last. But there's still issues where, if you try to have the LLM put fingers in front of its face like this, it like messes everything up. So you can see I'm a human right now. Other instances, in making kind of the text appear perfectly on the screen and there's no weird letters or it's out of place. So there's still issues with that, especially if you're a really big brand who's well known. You don't want to be putting out these really kind of shoddy ads. So I think the creative space has a lot to go, but there are constantly people working on refining this and retuning it. So it does have a bit more of the reliability you would expect from a click. Kind of, okay, go run my campaign.
Mm-hmm. Do companies that want to get into this, do they immediately bump up against issues where it's maybe not as easy as they thought it was to get it started? That AI is not the magic wand that maybe it's been sold to them as?
I imagine that's the case, but I also imagine that was the case with, if you rewind 10 years ago and you talk about big data, I think a lot of companies had projects that were along the big data and analytics line, and maybe those weren't always successful, and it was probably mostly a case about scoping the right problem and not trying to solve too big of a problem too fast. And so, if you're a company, you're interested in using AI in some way to do personalized advertising or personalized marketing. What's the smallest problem that you can solve in a reasonable amount of time, and why is AI actually going to be helpful for you there? Maybe you're in B2B and you're a salesperson, and so AI might be helpful there because you can evaluate more leads more rapidly and generate more customized emails for outreach. Maybe normally you would do 10 in a given day, and now you can probably scale that up to 30 or 40 perhaps, because you can just more easily aggregate the information and generate kind of templated emails otherwise. But it's going to be very different for any given company. So.
Yeah. And it's tough when all the hype is use AI, use AI. And I hear companies just tell their employees, use AI more. And they're like, well, I don't know how to incorporate that into my work stream. Could you give me some examples? And so I think right now there's a lot of hype around it. Everyone's being told to use AI, but just to Brett's point, what really needs to happen is you have to come up with specific use cases and then design your AI tools to fit that specific need. It's not at this point of artificial general intelligence, AGI, where you can just give it any problem and boom, it goes out and solves the issue. These are still very much tools, but tools that you can customize and specialize per your firm's needs. And I think that's been a big change with AI in general. We as humans have been tool builders. That's how we got ahead. That's how we got our lead on the other animal kingdom. And then over time, we kind of outsourced all of our tool making to other companies, to security companies, to digital playbooks, to these other agencies. Well, now AI is kind of returning that tool building capability to firms and individuals. I don't need to necessarily go to a specific company to solve this problem. I can get an AI tool or build an AI tool in-house, assuming I have the right people and the software engineers who understand how it works. And now I don't only have a tool that works, but it works for me, right? Exactly right. So I think it really comes down to a scoping problem, a planning problem, and really taking the time to thoughtfully integrate, which is slow, right? Planning is slower. But AI hype is fast, and so they're kind of, fighting each other.
As we've done a bunch of webinars on AI, I think sort of a recurring theme is the anxiety of AI replacing humans in their jobs, and I'm sure marketers feel the same way in a lot of ways, that if you can make 1,000 different ads with a computer model, why do we need a staff of 1,000 people on the creative side? So I don't think that's true. It seems to be, a well-founded anxiety, but there's an optimistic take that the human element will become even more important working with these tools that you talk about. So could either of you talk about what is the human element that will come to the fore maybe as these AI tools are rolled out for this purpose?
Yeah, I think since a lot of business is very collaborative, both within an organization and across organizations, in the end there's still a lot of personal relationships that matter. Trust between people in an org across companies, and no one wants to feel that you are outsourcing too much of that part of that relationship just to an AI. I'm sure that when some of us have gotten emails from whoever we might know, and if you sort of infer, I think they use the word delve a little too much, too many M dashes. Did they just send me that back, without even editing it a little bit? That trust is kind of weakened there. And I think that because relationships matter so much in business, it will be more important to establish kind kind of authenticity as a human and the trust that comes along with it. And I think that won't change.
Yeah, I mean, we are social creatures, and we like that social connection. You know, there was a popular self-published book that got a lot of attention, and they were getting ready to publish it, and then it was revealed that it was AI, and they pulled out publishing it. Right? The content was exactly the same. People still liked it, but the fact that all of a sudden a human wasn't behind it, or at least didn't seem to be primarily a human behind it, it lost a lot of that appeal to people. And I think that is still often the case in these business-to-business interactions, these person-to-person interactions, and even advertising to a degree. It is a creative medium, and when it feels like it was totally outsourced to AI, I think people have, in part, a negative reaction to it because they're worried about job loss and what that means, but also kind of that human element that Brett was talking about. And I think, on a broader level, I think what humans offer, at least now, who know what AI will be in the future, is that taste element, right? We are just able to keep up with culture. We have a embodied, lived experience that AI can't have. And so we will always have one perspective that an AI system won't be able to impart. And AI systems themselves are built and based on the average, right? And so it kind of wants to pull back to the mean, whereas humans can get more of those divergent thoughts and kind of creative outliers and make ththings that really feel like they break through. Mm-hmm. Again, that's me talking now in 2026 of April. We'll see how the science and technology develops.
Next month, who knows?
I won't be able to do this next month. It will just be my AI model.
It's a great question, great time to ask the question of what do you predict will happen in the future? And I'm going to make both of you answer this. Like in 5 years, what do you expect to see as far as AI's role in advertising and personalization?
In 5 years, I think, this is still a hard question to answer, even though I knew you were going to ask this question. I was trying to think about it. And whereas 5 years didn't seem like a really long time horizon a few years ago, now 5 years seems like the equivalent of 20 years in horizon, so that makes it even more difficult. I think there will be clearly more automation of creative, of campaign management tools. So if you're you're a brand manager, ad manager, you're sitting behind the desk and literally trying to manage your different ad campaigns on an ads manager interface. There will probably be a lot more tools that are already becoming available that will help you modify the settings, change the content, create new creative, change the targeting, all that, and that'll be a lot easier. But in the end, advertising is about targeting and creative, as we reaching people in the right place and showing them the right message. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, that's not going to really change, but where it's happening and what data it uses and how good the models are, that'll probably get better. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a ton to add to that. I'm glad you went first because I wasn't sure how to respond. I think, a lot of this answer depends too on how the technology advances. We've been seeing really kind of rapid gains. But the underlying architecture of how LLMs function has remained kind of consistent. We've been able to power it and scale it and put harnesses on it to improve it. And the question is, will there be some kind of step change where we actually have a real advance, in AI? And I think that would really shift my answer versus like where the current models are going and where, they might kind of top out in a sense. Not that they'll probably ever really top out. So, like Brett said, I think some of the fundamentals of how we interact with the world, even if AI is serving me up all my product choices, like I don't go to Google and search for things anymore, I just go to my chat window and say, hey, I'm looking for, a new lapel mic. And it's going to surface 3. I'm never probably going to want it to choose the one right for me. I will still want to feel like I have some agency over that decision. But how that decision comes about, what search processes I engage in, how I evaluate these, you could imagine like word of mouth recommendations becoming even more prominent because now I'm concerned about the sponsorship or the bias behind some of these AI ads. So I think, there's a whole change to the information ecosystem that's probably coming. Just like, malls kind of died off because they were less convenient than just going to Google and searching through online stores. Well, the internet mall is probably going to slowly fade away and will become more enmeshed into our little AI chat windows, and that will kind of serve us this like personalized world, and then how that interacts with all the stuff we've been talking about today.
I want to give I think those are great points. I want to give a slightly different data point as a perspective as well, which is that yes, these models will keep on getting better. The step changes seem to be maybe smaller now, although it's always hard to forecast what that looks like. So Meta in the last year announced they're kind of a new change to their foundational advertising models. They came out with this generative advertising model, GEM, and said that it was kind of powering ad delivery and targeting for them across all their sites. And they said that it had generated increases of around 5% in the conversion rates for advertising. So my interpretation of that was that's a relative change, as in a typical conversion rate through an ad campaign on, let's say, Meta or Instagram, Facebook, whatever, is maybe 2%. That's probably at the upper bound for most campaigns. So we're talking about this new technology that had, who knows how much, money and time was invested in it, and it made that 2% number go to 2.1%. So at the scale of a Meta, that's a very big change. But again, it's not like you're going to get people all of a sudden buying things that they just totally would not have wanted otherwise. It's a very small margin that they're working on. It's a very valuable margin, but it's not shifting things in huge ways. I think on that's kind of on the consumer side of where they might see some changes. I think more of the changes are going to happen on this operational on the back end of managing the campaigns, making that easier, making creative easier, et cetera. But on the outcome side, it's not going to be kind of moving heaven and earth.
Okay. Well, it relates to what I think was my most provocative question, which is...
Oh, that hasn't come yet?
Oh. It hasn't come yet.
That's for you.
Well, either of you can take this one, but all of this excitement around personalized advertising, does it mean that mass marketing goes away? Or does it slot alongside it as another tool in the marketer's toolbox?
Did you want to go?
Well, I can say, so I think mass marketing has been going away a bit over time, kind of no way I think around that. And what it's being replaced by will probably keep on increasing. So I'm thinking of, linear TV has been kind of steadily declining, cable obviously, replaced with streaming, CTV and whatnot. I think that AI is definitely is and will continue to kind of grow in those spaces. I know that Disney Plus announced something recently, a few months ago, where advertisers can kind of upload some basic assets and whatnot, and then they would generate automatically like 15 to 30 second ad slots, tailored even to the content around which the user was watching already in Disney Plus. So that's going to be bound to take more money away from broader kind of campaigns. At the same time, broad kind of mass marketing campaigns tend to be more cost effective on a CPM or a GRP basis. And so for some advertisers, that's still going to be an appealing medium. If you just want to reach, if your product is very of interest to many, many, many people, then you may not need to target it that effectively. So,
yeah, I mean, if you look at the history of advertising, it has been slowly but surely moving toward personalization. Like we go from the radio to cable TV to the internet. All of these have allowed us to personalize ads on a more and more fine-grained way. You even take something like live sports, once that goes to streaming, right? Well, yes, you're all watching that together, but each of person's streaming channel, the ads in between can be personalized if they wanted to. You look at some live casts of like soccer games where that banner that runs along in the field, for everyone in the field, it's the same, but for people at home, they can use digital to change even that, right? So I think the idea is like, yes, mass marketing in the sense of like everyone sees exactly the same message is probably slowly eroding, but you'll still have things like billboards and bus wraps and any kind of out of home is going to be this mass market style, but anything that lives on a digital surface is probably going to be personalized in some form. Of course, if you're Coca-Cola, right, you might run the same ad with polar bears to everybody. But you might do slightly different targeting, knowing, well, these people have never bought a soft drink, so I'm not going to waste my money on that ad space, but I will use it over here.
Is there a sense, I'm sure a lot of businesses are excited about this, ready to leap into it, but is there a sense in these early days of there are certain types of industries that this might be appropriate for and certain types of industries that maybe should be more cautious or reluctant to move into this space? And if so, what's the breakdown there?
I think it comes back to a question from earlier of, what is the use case? Why is it that AI is going to be incrementally beneficial here for this task? A lot of problems don't necessarily require AI, however you might define AI in that case. If you're a company that has more data on first-party data or otherwise on your consumers or potential customers, if you have a use case that is hard to scale with kind of the pre-AI days, that has a way of defining a process, defining an evaluation, defining kind of an iterative approach, then that sounds like something that would be very appealing or amenable to an AI-based solution. But if you're just a small shop and you kind of know what you do and you already do it fairly well, then I'm not sure if you need to invest and kind of go out over your skis on something that seems interesting and seems kind of cool just for the sake of doing it.
For businesses that are looking to dive into this, we've talked a lot about privacy and ethics concerns. What sort of questions should businesses be asking to maybe set up guidelines for themselves on when and where and how this should be used?
I mean, it's going to depend largely based on kind of the industry you're working within and what your consumer base is like. Already there's a lot of regulations and laws about advertising to children, right? And so how you fit in personalization there. I'm not even going to touch because I have a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old, so no ads for them. That's that rule. But I think, even in domains that we might think are ethically ambiguous, like mental health, they've been showing how personalization outside of AI can be helpful in maintaining like your behavioral therapy or your medication. So I think there are ways that personalization can be leveraged even in some of these kind of touchier areas. But it will be on a use case by use case basis, right? And so in terms of firms, I think there's a couple things they can think about. One is like, where are they sourcing this data from? Like, how are they getting it? What are the variables that they're using that data to kind of target? Am I trying to figure out, are they just interested in this product line? Am I trying to figure out that they have an emotional neuroticism in this space and I can activate it by using this? Is this data taken from, their parents' Instagram? Oh, I learned how, Jake talks in all of his posts, so when I see his daughter, I'm going to give him an ad that uses kind of the cadence of his language, right? So I think there's a whole litany of different things that we could talk about, and right now it's just kind of up to firms to decide what they think is A, ethical, and B, again, as I was talking about earlier, where does it cross over from being like helpful and useful personalization to just feeling like surveillance?
How about on the consumer side? What maybe protect themselves is too strong a phrase, but what can consumers do to at least recognize maybe that AI is being used to personalize advertising, and how can they be, I guess, sort of savvy consumers about this new approach and how it might be used on them?
They should realize that information that they share and a lot of their activities, perhaps online, especially in digital sense, could be inputs to some kind of personalized advertising solution. Now, they will probably not really be able to infer that, or at least not correctly be able to infer that, even though they might think that it's the case. But there's this old saying that if you're not paying for the product, then you just might be the product. And on these platforms and a lot of any kind of free digital service that you're enjoying, your attention and your data are the product, and they're being used to sell to an advertiser, to benefit, to make that site or that service available. And so I think consumers should be aware that there is that exchange of data in the background, and there are ways that they can opt out, or there are ways that they can usually minimize how much that information is being shared. But that is kind of the reality of the way that a lot of the internet, kind of the internet writ large, is supported. It is mostly supported through advertising.
Yeah. I mean, I think for consumers, one thing I always tell people is if it's too good to be true, It's probably not true, right? The world is a messy, uneven, imperfect place, and you suddenly get this ad that's supposed to solve all of your problems. Well, maybe look at it with a little bit more scrutiny. Or this article or post that just aligns so well with your beliefs and opinions. Well, might that have been a little curated? I think we just need to enhance the skepticism with which we treat things on the internet, from what deepfakes looked like they could accomplish, 3 years ago, to now what they can accomplish. I mean, you just have to, unfortunately, carry a little bit of doubt and, trust, verify sort of situation.
And to circle back to personalized persuasion, advertising is just one way that AI can be used to create persuasive content. What are some other areas that people should be concerned about or watch out for as far as how this could be weaponized?
You mean outside of like marketing and advertising? Well, I mean, I think a big one is going to be like news and the politics that you follow. For example, you might have a politician who gives an hour-long speech, but then you get served the clip of that says the words and things that you really wanted to hear. And you're like, yes, that's the politician for me, right? Without realizing that there's actually kind of a much broader context in which that's delivered. And to a degree, we're already getting that through cable news television, right? They're showcasing the worst or the best of the candidates they want to align with. But I think it can happen even on a more granular level. If we want to get truly Black Mirror science fiction-y, there's some research going back to, the early 2000s where they took political candidates and then merged their faces ever so slightly with the participant's own face. So then when they later saw that politician, they're like, I trust that guy. He seems very trustworthy. Is his name Jake, And so there are all these kinds of subtle things that the technology can afford, and so I think your best line of defense is like, does this feel too right? Does this feel too good? Maybe I should look into this a little bit more. I'm constantly getting these crazy Instagram posts, and the first thing I'll ever do is click the comments. And if you see the top 5 comments are all like AI, 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 it's probably a pretty good sign.
Now see, that's the problem. You're clicking on the comments. That's an engagement. And that's feeding the algorithm because they probably think that that's a positive signal for you that you liked or wanted to engage with the ad or whatever the content is, and you're going to see more of that. My wife has what she likes to think is a very pristine Instagram feed, and she scrolls very fast through anything that she is served that she doesn't like, and if I grab her phone and threaten to click on like an ad, she gets very upset by that. She tries to keep the algo very clean.
That's a potent threat. I want to get to some audience questions with our last few minutes here, and one, it's very practical and we've kind of glossed over it. But just how is AI changing the cost of advertising? And there's a lot of ways that you could answer that, I guess. But is it,
There's a lot of ways that you could answer that. So one way is what we've kind of mentioned of it's making it easier to create a lot of content. If you haven't tried out various tools for creating ads or creating campaign kind of copy, I mentioned Pomeli only because I did try it out. It was sort of easy. It was so easy to use, and it did a decent job given my level of effort. That it's clearly lowering the costs. On the other hand, doing a good job with actually reaching the right people and managing the campaigns and everything there, that still requires some more effort.
I mean, there's a lot of other kind of like secondary costs that reducing in terms of market research, right? Not that synthetic participants solve everything, but it's kind of a first pass of like, okay, is this totally off base or is maybe there's some promise to it? There's also, YouTube now has a program where they can help match your message with a creator. So rather than having to search through catalogs or read up, it will just kind of say this is a good match for what you're trying to say. So I think there are all these things on the side in addition to exactly what Brett said in terms of reducing that kind of creation costs and time and resource costs too of like having to click through a bunch of stuff.
I mean, when I publish a new paper or post a new paper, I now certainly go to an LLM and ask it to generate a LinkedIn post, Twitter or X set of posts, and it does a decent job in a much less period of time, and that's just easy.
Well, there's always a role for insight, and don't forget to promote those papers too. Don't forget about us. A couple people are asking, we've touched on this a little bit, but to frame it this way, will there be an opportunity for consumers to opt out of personalized ads, and how would they do so? I think you mentioned that U.S. regulation isn't really moving on this, but Europe has a different attitude towards internet privacy. Other countries have different approaches. So what does the future look like for that?
I mean, I think there's a few ways this could play out. You know, if you want like I believe that, and Brett, correct me if I'm wrong, like in Europe, if you don't want any personalization or don't want any advertising, you have to pay a fee, or you don't want, so there may be something.
There was a settlement with Meta where Meta had to offer a for-fee version of I guess its sites that people could then choose to opt into and pay a fee to have no advertising on Facebook maybe and Instagram. But I believe that was just for Meta properties, not otherwise.
Gotcha.
So, but that is a model that's being kind of considered, at least in Europe and in the EU. I don't know whether that'll happen in the US necessarily or across all platforms, but yes.
It used to be the case too. You could opt in for whether or not you wanted personalized ads or not personalized ads. And you're still going to get the same amount of ads. And generally people are like, well, if I'm going to get ads, at least show me something that kind of interests me versus totally random, uninteresting things.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the interesting aspects of this is that if you can offer people to opt out, and they can do that, and they probably will see less relevant content as a result. It's interesting to ask, what do they think is actually the downside of allowing the personalization? So you have to separate from, is the data being collected but not used for the advertising, or is it not being collected and stored in the first place at all? And it's probably truly hard to completely opt out, because if you use these services, these digital platforms, I mean, they still have to see your browser or see your device. Your devices, you're probably not getting a new phone every other week. So a lot of information can still be attached to items that are unique to you. It may or may not get used for advertising, but it's still there. So if you want to be very, very hesitant about anything, you're going to have to really divorce yourself from a lot of technology these days. But otherwise, it's not totally clear to me how big of a benefit is. And you can always worry about hacks, exposing data breaches, and
totally.
That's a very reasonable concern. But it's hard to plan for that, and I'm not sure how much I personally put as a weight on that.
Some questions about measurement and getting started. One person asked, at our organization, our poor customer data is stymieing some of our personalization efforts. Can we still get actionable personalization with poor data, or is that required to get started?
Like so many things, bad data in, bad answers out. So it's a little hard to talk about in general terms, but as with any kind of analytic approach, you need to have good data. You need to have good data that has the right kind of variation across whatever you're trying to learn about, like whether you're trying to send this message to one group and that message to another group. If all of your data from the past, you've always sent the exact same message to everyone, it's going to be very, very hard for you to learn if there might be better alternatives based on your past data. What you would have to do is do some experimentation, just try some new things out. Whether you can do that based on your data or not, I'm not sure, but some experimentation is helpful.
Bad data in, bad data out. If I give an LLM, this person is 33 and they have brown hair and they wear clothes, it's like, well, what's it going to do with that, right? And there's studies trying to show, LLMs can't personalize ads. But if you give it bad data, well, of course, it's not going to be able to personalize, just like a human.
One last recommendation I just want to finish on, or one question, is, are there books or researchers that either of you look to for good information on this fast-moving topic?
You mean beyond us?
Beyond us, yes.
Certainly. Now I can picture their Twitter handles. But honestly, setting aside what you might think about Twitter X these days, there are a lot of folks on it who post great content about how they use AI to do ad campaign management, all sorts of different AI kind of tips and tools. Andre Karpathy, who was at OpenAI, has a lot of great content out there, and I'm sure if you search briefly, you'll find, here are the top 10 people to follow on Twitter or LinkedIn about it. So I wish I could be more specific, though.
The CMO of Meta, Alex Schultz, his new book, Click, is related to all of this, so that would be something certainly to check out. One of the things I do is like OpenAI or ChatGPT will let you set a task reminder. And so every day it scans the web based on the parameters I give it related to personalized persuasion in the empirical side or in the practitioner side. And then it comes to my inbox with, 5 to 10 kind of news headlines, and I'll browse that and select the ones that sound interesting to me. So there's lots of tools out there now that will just kind of cultivate the information that's most relevant to you and your needs rather than just maybe relying on some kind of blanket source that otherwise might be a little too broad.
So using personalization to learn about personalization.
I mean, it doesn't get much more meta than that.
Exactly. Well, that's a great place to stop. We're out of time. A huge thank you to Jake and Brett for joining us today and sharing your insights. Thanks to our viewers for attending today and for sending in so many great questions, more than I could possibly get to. We'll share a video of today's event in the coming days. It'll be on the Kellogg YouTube channel and on Kellogg Insights. And if you want to be the first to hear about future episodes of the Insightful Leader Live, the best way to do that is to sign up for our newsletter. There should be a link in the chat right about now, but you can always find a link at Kellogg Insight, and we hope you'll visit and read some of our stories. So thanks so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time.